The story of Ace Frehley told by Ace himself. Author Greg Prato on the show to talk about his brand new book, Talk to Me, Conversations with Ace Frehley. That's next on Booked on Rock. Welcome back to Booked on Rock, the podcast for those about to read and rock. I'm Eric Senich, and we welcome back, as he promised, he was going to put out an Ace Frehley book. He promised it a few weeks ago. He is back, and he has come through with that promise. The brand new book is a compilation of interviews that he did with Ace over the years. The book is titled Talk to Me, Conversations with Ace Frehley. It is Greg Prato. Greg, thanks for coming back on to share some of what's in this brand new book.
Hello, Eric. Thanks for having me back on. I definitely appreciate it.
Ace passed on October 16th. You were able to get this book out in less than a month. I imagine you had some late nights working on this book. Talk about the process putting it together. You had comments from several people paying tribute to Ace, including Joe Bonamassa, David Ellefson, Kim Thile, Alex Lifeson of Rush.
Well, the thing is, honestly, like the title says, it's the idea for the book was after Ace passed, I was very sad, listening to a lot of his music. And then I had the realization, I interviewed him many, many times over the years, and we covered a wide variety of topics, both his professional life, personal life, Kiss, solo career, everything. And I realized, what about if I compile all these interviews into a single book, similar to the book called Eruption, which was by Brad Talinsky and I believe a second gentleman, I forget the name right now.
Chris Gill.
There you go. Yeah. And they combine all the interviews conducted with the great Eddie Van Halen. So I figured, well, that was such a great book. What about for Ace? Because Ace is, I think, a fantastic, very highly influential guitarist as well. So I did that. And then I happened to, over the years, have made, friendships and also acquaintances with several renowned rock musicians and also rock names. So I reached out to a few people just saying, I'm working on this book about Ace. I'm going to be compiling all my interviews. Would you be interested in being also interviewed for this book so I could include several tribute interviews, brand new interviews? And I was lucky. Many of the people that I asked were like, yes, absolutely. So yeah, the people that you just mentioned, most of them were phone interviews. Alex Lifeson was through a email Q&A, but he still told some pretty good stories. He gave the story behind the character called the Bag. I
did not know about that. Are you
familiar with that, Eric?
No, I did. I read it in the book. First time I ever saw that.
Yeah, there's a famous thing of people that may not know. When Kiss and Rush toured together back in 74, 75, Ace and Peter were the partiers of Kiss, and Geddy and also Alex were the partiers of Rush. And they would often congregate after shows, and they would hang out, drink, and party. And Alex came up with a character called the Bag, which I guess they get a little stoned or drunk, and Alex would put a paper bag over his head and make a face, and he would start insulting people. and Ace in particular found that character to be hilarious. So he actually mentioned it during one of our interviews, and I know he talked to also Eddie Trunk over the years about the character called the Bag. So yeah, that was talked about. And yeah, also Kim Thile from Soundgarden. I was very, very, very nice of him to take out. He took out time while they were rehearsing for the whole Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction.
Yeah, I saw that performance.
And also even the great Eddie Trunk was on a cruise, I believe, or he was like on some vacation. He wasn't on a vacation. He was emceeing a rock event somewhere. I forget. I don't know if it was a cruise or where it was, but yeah, I call, he's like, I'm going to be kind of busy, but I'll try to make time for you. And he was a man of his word. He also made time. Also, Matt Pinfield was about to leave to go on a cruise or something for Coheed and Cambria. And he made time, and that became the book's forward. So
that's cool.
Yeah, I'm very happy with a lot of the great people. And what's great is it's a wide variety of people from a wide variety of different musical styles. And it's great that it all shows the wide variety of musical styles that Ace Frehley and also Kiss touched over the years.
Absolutely. And you interviewed Ace a lot. He talked a lot with you. Was he easy to get stories out of him, or did you have to pull things out of him? I don't get that feeling. I think he was open to talking about anything, right?
No, his life was a complete open book, which was, I think, so great about him just as a person and also his career. And yeah, I was lucky to do once a face-to-face interview with him back, and I think it was like 2009. It was while he was promoting his well, not his first solo album, but his first solo album in many, many years, an album called Anomaly.
One of my favorites from him.
Yeah, I went into New York City, and I what's weird is I can't remember the exact place, but it was like a rehearsal type studio that I think was owned by Gibson Guitars at the time, but I don't think it's around anymore because I haven't heard anything about it. It may have just been like a short-lived thing. I'm not sure, but I had a full hour, just me and Ace sitting in a rehearsal type studio place. And yeah, it was great speaking with him. And over the years, yeah, I realized I interviewed him so many times for either book projects, sites, magazines. So yeah, it was great to speak with him. And again, it's a wide variety of topics, everything from his guitar gear to his personal life, songwriting. Everything was great. And then also, since you're a big Van Halen fan, I interviewed a gentleman. His name is Paris Mayhew. He is probably best known as the original guitarist of the band the Cro-Mags, which were a very influential hardcore type band back in the 80s. They put out an album that tends to get overlooked from 1986 called The Age of Quarrel, which I highly recommend. It's like Black Sabbath meets hardcore. It's very original, great, great album. But yes, this gentleman, the guitarist Paris May, he was now in a band called it is called Agros, and he's a big, big Ace fan. I've become friendly with him over the years, and on Facebook, he's always posting things about Ace, how he was a big fan of Ace growing up. And I interviewed him for the book, and he dropped a bit of a bombshell that if you're a Van Halen fan, he claims. Now, when he said this, I was like, wait a second. There is a unaccompanied guitar solo on Kiss Alive 2. It's at the end of the song Shock Me. So it's Ace Frehley just by himself live on stage playing. And he said, Paris said this, go back and compare that solo to Eruption. And Paris's theory is that Eddie modeled Eruption after that solo.
What? Really?
And if you go back and
Okay.
listen to it, I'm not going to say Eddie ripped it off note for note, but there are definitely some comparisons. Like he says, there's a point where he's finger picking. There's a point where he does dive bombs. Although Ace isn't, he didn't have a, Floyd Rose tremolo. Ace did a thing that used to be called dinosaur bends, which you would take the sixth string, the E string, and bend it. In fact, I asked Ace about this, and he talks about this in the book. But yeah, he's doing all these things that if you listen to Eruption and compare that side by side, there are definitely some similarities.
And that's the live version solo
Yeah,
of
what it
Shock
is,
Me?
it's on the Alive 2 album, the song Shock Me. It's not the guitar solo in the middle of the song. It's at the end of the song, they go into a jam part, then Ace just does a unaccompanied solo by himself, and that's what he's talking about.
Okay. Because that's going to rile up the diehard Eddie
It
fans.
is.
How
It is.
dare you? But I'll give it a listen.
Okay.
I'll give it a listen. That would have been, where was that recorded? Was that recorded at the LA Forum?
That was at the LA Forum in 1977. And I also interviewed Ace once, and he claims that in 1976, Eddie Van Halen saw Kiss perform at Madison Square Garden because I once asked Ace about how if he was one of the first rock guitarists to do the two-handed tapping thing. And to Ace's credit, he said, yeah, Eddie saw me do it, but, we all, he didn't necessarily say that like Eddie ripped him off. He just said that rock guitarists are influenced and take things from everyone. So
Oh,
if
absolutely. Yeah.
if he inspired him to do it, then he was very happy to hear about that. But of course, the famous thing that, of course, Eddie Van Halen says that he saw Jimmy Page doing the thing live where he put his hand up and he was just doing like a pull off thing. And then Eddie Van Halen realized, well, wait, if he's doing that, what if I use my finger as like a nut and move it up? And then he experimented, and that's how he came up with the two-handed tapping thing, supposedly.
To leap to that, he's ripping off Ace. That's not what it is. All these guitarists, musicians play off of each other. They see something and they inspire each other. And that's very, very possible that that's where it is. And that's why I asked if it was at the LA Forum, because obviously that's closest to where Eddie lived. And in 1970,
Yeah,
1976.
but then according to Ace, Eddie, I get, what it could have been is when Gene flew Van Halen out to do the demo in 76. Maybe Kiss was playing Madison Square Garden around that time, and they got to see Kiss perform. That's at least what Ace says.
Okay.
Yeah, he was playing Madison Square Garden. He looked in the audience and he saw Eddie Van Halen there.
Interesting. Well, you talked about Ace being open to talking about anything, and his sobriety was something he talked about, something he was really proud of. He was proud of the fact that guitarists were influenced by him or inspired by him, but he was really proud about being sober. There's a comment that he told you in 2009. I'm assuming, I think this is the one that you went to New York City to interview him for. And he said, for the longest time, he would get sober, but then still want to drink and eventually go back. But at that point, he was done with it. And he was proud of the fact that people would come up to him, like a fan would come up to him and tell him, I got sober because you inspired me to get sober. And that, I get the feeling that meant a lot to him because he brought up his sobriety, I think, in every interview you did with him.
It did. Yeah, it did. Yeah. I think it definitely meant a lot to him. But like one thing that I interviewed for this book also David Ellefson, the former bassist from the band Megadeth, and I asked him. I said, because David Ellefson also struggled for well, not a long time, but in the '80s, it's not a secret that he and also Dave Mustaine were addicted to heroin and also other substances, but they both wound up getting clean. And I asked David Ellefson if he ever had the opportunity to sit down and speak with Ace about this. And he said, yes, actually, we did. And he talks about a whole thing. And something that him and Ace agreed on is that they didn't, like, they would, I guess, they would discuss this in interviews, but they kind of felt like that it was up to the individual to kind of come to that decision themselves that they wanted to get clean and sober. It's not something you could really like make someone do. And that's really, it's something I talk about in a lot of my books. Like you just had me on recently talking about the alternative for the masses book. Just some people it clicks, like they just get so fed up and they with doing drugs or drinking, and they're just like, I'm done with it, it's over. Whereas other people, like sadly, of course, like Lane Staley or the great Shannon Hoon, who talked about a lot over the years, they just never get there, and it winds up sadly ultimately killing them. So but I definitely got the vibe from Ace that that he was very happy that if someone seeing him get sober may have inspired them or at least showed them like, look, if Ace could do it after many many years of struggling and not being sober, if he could do it, then I could do it. I think that definitely was a major thumbs up from him.
And no coincidence that as soon as he gets sober, he becomes really productive. That's another thing he was really happy to talk about. 6 studio albums between 2009 and 2024. 6. And you could see how focused he was on the music during the years that you talked to him. He talks about the track Genghis Khan from Anomaly, which I love that track. I love that album. How it took 5 years to get it just right. What comes to mind for you when talking to him about his music and how focused he seemed to be once he was sober?
Yeah, what's funny is in the time that Ace put out 6 albums, Kiss put out maybe just like one album or something like that. So
Right?
it shows, yeah, either 1 or 2 albums compared to Ace's 6. And
Yeah, it might
yeah,
have been
and, the
two. There
thing,
was There was
Monster and what was the other
the one
one?
before that with Modern Delilah.
Sonic
Sonic
Boom.
Boom. Yeah.
Yeah, so those were the two. But yeah, I mean, I can speak from experience. I was lucky to see Ace 3 times over like a 5-year period. Like the last time I saw him was 2019, and I saw him a few times right before that, and he still played great. Still, sang. I mean, of course, Ace would tell you he wasn't like a Freddie Mercury type vocal talent, but he still sang the songs similar to how it sounded on the albums and everything. He, like live, the solos maybe weren't as like on point as they were back in the Kiss days, but he even would say during interviews, like, look, like I'm 70 years old now. I can't play the same way I did back then, but he still absolutely had the spirit, the drive. And to be honest with you, watching some of the YouTube clips of Kiss on their last tours, I think Ace sounded really just as good because also Ace had a fantastic backing band. He always surrounded himself with great musicians. That's one thing you got to give him credit that he had a good eye and a good ear for picking out great, band members. Going all the way back to, of course, the drummer Anton Fig, who played on his 1978 solo album and later went on to be a David Letterman show band member.
And as you know, he's on Unmasked.
Yep,
He's on
exactly.
Kisses Unmasked.
Dynasty and also Unmasked.
Oh, a
Those two
Dynasty
albums.
too. I
Yep,
forgot.
yep. Dynasty too. Yeah, and there's a famous story too that for one day he was a member of Kiss. After it was clear that Peter Criss was going to leave in 1980, Ace went to Gene and Paul and said, "Look, I think Anton Fig should be the drummer." And they're like, "All right, that sounds good." And then Ace called Anton and said, "Look, you're in Kiss." Then the next day, Gene and Paul call Ace and they're like, we thought about it. We don't think that's going to work. Maybe because Anton Fig had already been in a band that put out an album. So people knew his face. And that was when Kiss didn't want people to know what they look like. So Then
Interesting.
Ace had to
Yeah.
call him back, had to call Anton back and said, "Look, I have bad news. It's not going to work out."
Yeah. I remember Anton just saying it never worked out.
Yeah. And then of course they wound up getting of course Eric Carr, who wound up being a great drummer as well.
Who Ace loved.
Yep. Ace loved
He loved
him. And
it.
of course I did a book about Eric called the Eric Carr story, which yep, Eric Carr, a great, great drummer.
Yep.
Absolutely.
December 2023, you interviewed Ace, and he brought up the topic of mortality since so many musicians from his era were passing. He seemed to be in good health. He told you about his doctor being impressed by his blood work, got better each year. So he seemed to be okay.
He did.
What do we know? I'm hearing that he fell twice, that he fell once, he was recovering, but then fell again.
Yeah, when I interviewed Eddie Trunk for the book, he was in regular contact with Ace up until the very end. What happened was he fell. It was either in his studio or at his house. He fell once. He hurt himself, but it wasn't bad. Eddie got in contact with him, and he said, "What happened? Are you okay?" And he says, "Yeah, I'm fine. I took a spill. I just it wasn't that bad. I'm going to be fine." And then they left off. They were going to get together sooner or later for like dinner or something like that. And then word got to Eddie a while later that Ace took a second fall. And this was the really bad fall. I think he fell downstairs and he hit his head. And that led to brain bleed, I believe. And Eddie tried reaching out to, tried texting him, had no response, called him, no response. Then I think he got in contact with Ace's actual family. And that's when he was told that, yeah, it's very serious. And then sadly, of course, on October 16th, 2025, he passed away.
So no indication, there was no condition or anything. I mean, what led to him? He was always kind of like, he would even joke himself about being a little bit clumsy.
Right. Well, he even had a album title called Trouble Walking.
Right.
But yes, yeah,
I mean, is it that simple? And it's hard to hear that. You'd like to think that there was, maybe a more reasonable explanation, like his health is failing.
there's no real reason. I mean, one thing that actually Eddie Trunk was very clear during my interview is that Ace was sober until the very end. So it wasn't like he was drunk. It wasn't like he fell off the wagon. It's just
Well,
one of
that's
those
good.
things.
Yeah.
Just as maybe you get older, maybe his like balance wasn't what it once was. We're not too sure exactly what, but yeah, it's
But that's what I
sad.
loved about him. He had that kind of stumble and then get himself together on stage type of thing. He had that really cool rock and roll kind of, that stride.
Yeah.
Never,
Yeah,
never in a
actually,
rush, never in a hurry, just a little.
one thing I've never shared with anyone that I'll actually share with you and also your viewers and listeners is when I did the face-to-face interview with him in 2009, when we were given a tour of like what was the like Gibson factory and there was like a rehearsal studio and everything. And while we were given the tour, I could tell it looked like he almost walked with like a slight limp. So I don't know, because again, of course, back in the early 80s, he had a really bad car accident and all this other stuff. So I don't know if he had like a problem with his legs slightly or something like that. But yeah, I could have sworn he walked a little bit with a limp that one time I met him in 2009.
You mentioned the dinosaur bends. That Gene Simmons came up with that term, but he also talked about the use of the kill switch on the guitar came from Pete Townsend.
Yes, it did. Yeah. But Pete Townsend used it a bit on some of the 60s era Who songs. But I think it's really Ace that perfected it and really brought it to like a wide audience, specifically metal shredder type guitarists. Um, yeah, basically what you do is the Gibson Les Paul has two pickups, and you just turn the volume down on one pickup, so it's totally dead, and the other one you have the volume up. So when you're doing the toggle switch, it creates a what they call kill switch effect, and
Right.
that's what Ace pretty much popularized. But it's been used elsewhere, like for instance in the Pretenders song "Tattooed Love Boys," which is one of my favorite songs and favorite solos by the late great James Honeyman Scott. At the end, he does that. He does the kill switch thing to wrap up the solo at the end.
Dave Manichetti, Y&T.
Yep, there you go. Another
The
gentleman.
helicopter sound, right?
Yeah, yeah, right. There you, yeah, many people have used it. I believe John Five, maybe Bumblefoot. I believe there's other people that have. Oh, I believe Buckethead. I think is also a kill switch guy, if I'm not mistaken.
But that was always a cool part of Ace's style,
Hmm.
using that kill switch during his solo. He once roadied for Jimi Hendrix. He always had some great stories to tell. He was a great storyteller too, just the way he told them. So you asked him if it was true if he roadied for Jimi Hendrix, and he went right into a great story. What did he say about whether that was true or not?
Yeah, what happened was it was the summer of 1970. I believe it was the last time Jimi Hendrix ever played New York. It was a place called Randall's Island, which was like it said, an island. It was a outdoor venue that would sometimes have shows, and it was a multi-band bill. I forget what the name of the show was, but there were other bands. Like, I believe like Mountain was on the bill, and also some others. And Ace was there. This is a good 3 years before he joined Kiss, so no one knew who he was or anything. And he said he was there. He was walking around and he saw the backstage area, and he said in 1970, it wasn't like what it was just like a few years later that they had security and things like that. You could pretty much, if you wanted to, just walk right back there. So he said, I'll just walk right back there, pretending like I'm, like I know like what I'm doing or like I'm part of the, crew or something. So he walks back, he's looking around, and one of the guys comes up to him. He's like, "Who are you?" And he's like, "Oh, to be honest with you, I'm just a fan just walking around." He's like, "Well, what do you do? Like, do you have any talent or anything?" He's like, "Well, I've experience setting up drums." And he's like, "All right, well, come on." And he wound up setting up Mitch Mitchell's drum set that night, which was a very cool thing. Yeah.
My name's Paul
Right.
Frehley. All right, kid, come on in.
Right. Right.
What can you do? What can you do? The battles that he had with Kiss, the former members that he worked with, Gene and Paul, they were publicized so much, and I wondered if Ace got tired of talking about it, but it didn't seem that way. I mean, you would ask him about it, and he never gave you an indication like, I'm tired of talking about this. He was open about it, wasn't he?
No, I'll tell you one thing about Ace. He would talk about everything. I mean, he's talked about in interviews, not necessarily with me, but like other people, like very personal things about his like sex life and things like that. Like that. I don't know
Yes.
if you saw this thing that's getting a lot of views after he passed away because everyone's looking at classic like Ace interviews. He was interviewed by Loudwire and he talked about a wild weekend he had with Dimebag Darrell, and he gets very graphic about
No, I
what
didn't
he
see
did.
it.
Yeah, you should check that out. Like it's pretty. He was his whole life was a complete open book. So you got to give him credit that he was just he laid it all on the line.
I thought it was interesting his view on that whole story of the Kiss, the war in between the members, that he never I don't know, like he didn't seem to be he would take things personally. He'd get pissed off. I remember he was on Eddie Trunk, get really pissed at Paul Stanley about something, but then like a month later, even less, he'd just be like, yeah, it's no big deal. I just talked to Paul the other day and everything's fine. It's like it just went back and forth. They kept in touch. It was this weird kind of like, hey, it's show business. This is what it is. I still love those guys. Yeah, we fight, we don't fight. And there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of business dealings. Like Gene said that Ace and Peter were invited to be part of the End of the Road final show, but they said no. And I think they said Ace wanted more money. So there was never any real definitive. It was just a back and forth thing that just seemed to go on. Even when they were together, it seemed that way.
Yeah, there was. And I also once asked Ace, not only once, but twice, I asked him about like, what's the story with your makeup design? Do you own it? And does Kiss like,
Yes.
like does Kiss pay you a fee to use it, or what's the story? And Ace, to the best of his knowledge, he said I never signed it away to Kiss. But if I think what probably took so now to back up a little bit, Peter Criss did sell his makeup design to Kiss, so they completely own that. Ace for many years did not sell it. I think what probably happened is he would license it to Kiss. So what would happen is and Ace talks about this in one of the interviews that it was in perpetuity, which means I believe like forever. So if I kind of am trying to connect the dots, if I had to take a guess, I would say that he must have leased he must have signed an agreement with Kiss that they could use it as much as they want, but he, I think, received some kind of compensation for it being used on merchandise and things like that. To the best of my knowledge, Peter Criss did not make anything off merch and stuff like that. That to me probably makes the most sense because I know Paul Stanley has gone public saying no, we own it, but then Ace would say no, you don't. They don't own it. I never sold it to them outright. So
Well, his relationship with Paul, the dynamic there is interesting because he's the three books that were written by Paul, Gene, and Peter, and in terms of what Ace thought of them. It's Paul's book that he kind of took the most offense to. He didn't like some of the things Paul said in the book, and he's been vocal in interviews where he'd be pretty pissed off at Paul. But then again, going back to what I was just saying, then he'd be on Paul's solo album.
Yeah, yeah. It
So,
seemed like Ace.
it's like, what's, I don't know. It's just like this back and forth. And even with like Gene, when Gene did his Vault tour, Ace showed up, and there's a video on YouTube where they're doing a press conference, doing a Q&A, and you could just see Gene is so respectful to Ace. He
Yeah,
just, he really loved him. So it's just that weird back and forth thing that's
there
different,
is.
I think, from other bands. It's not like with Van Halen, you're not going to see like Dave and Sammy there, and having a love fest.
Right. Or I mean, you could maybe say it wasn't as venomous as the David Lee Roth Van Halen brother relationship, but David
Right.
Lee Roth and the Van Halen brothers were able to coexist from time to time. I don't think it was ever there wasn't that much dislike between Ace and Gene and Paul, but just it seemed like Ace was a very, very laid back fellow. He never really held things in as much. It seemed like Gene and Paul were always very, like, especially in interviews, very vocal about like bad mouthing former Kiss members and things like that. Whereas Ace would sometimes say things like, for instance, he was pretty honest with me. He asked, I mean, he told me once, and this is in the book, towards the end of his last go around with Kiss, which would have been in the early 2000s, he said it was getting to the point again that Gene and Paul were driving him crazy. And then, but to Ace's credit, he says, but I was also making them crazy, so at least he could see the thing with the only exception I have as a Kiss fan. Like, I understand no one is completely, like, totally innocent. I know that Ace did things, Peter did things, Gene, Paul, no one's perfect, but I just think that, I'm trying to think how I could word this.
Ace is more willing to take his half of the responsibility.
I think that's what it is, and that he was willing to let bygones be bygones, kind of, and yeah, not like in kind of take the high road, and maybe even just admit, like, there's the famous saying that it takes two to tango, but in that case it was four, and
I think you hit the nail on the head. And like you said, he's very laid back, lets things go. He moves on.
right,
I
yeah,
think
yeah,
that's
that's
really it.
I'm pretty sure one of the times, yeah, I'm thinking about it, I'm not just saying this because I just wrote because I just compiled a book about Ace, but he did during our interview say some pretty insightful, enlightening things about him not wanting to hold things in. Like, it's not worth carrying around the baggage and all that type of stuff. To me, it probably, I would imagine it went hand in hand with him also getting sober and putting drugs behind him. I think when in certain instances when you do that, you get enlightened and you maybe see life differently, and you also appreciate life. And I
I
think,
think you bring up a good point. I think,
you know,
yep, with the recovery, a
right.
lot of that is forgiving others, forgiving yourself, that
Hmm.
kind of thing. And he had a sense of humor about himself. One
He
of the
did.
interviews, it might have been Loudwire, but he's
Well,
like,
it's,
he's pulling his shirt over. He's like, I don't want anybody to see my gut.
yeah, right. Well, there's
He does
also,
the laugh.
yeah. One of the people I interviewed for the book is Don Jameson, who we all know from That Metal Show, but he's also a great stand-up comic.
Yep.
And I asked him about Ace. I was like, could Ace have been a stand-up comic? And he gave a pretty good answer. Don did, and he also talks about the famous Tomorrow Show interview with Tom
Uh,
Snyder, where Ace just takes over the whole show, and he's laughing and he's drunk, and you could see that Paul and Gene are just not having it. They're not happy at all. But Don Jameson talks about that if you watch that show, it's almost similar to a stand-up comic, that you start off strong, in the middle or the end, sometimes it goes down a little bit, but then you end very, very strong. You get like very, very great laughs, or you end on a high note. And that's exactly what Ace did with that.
that's an interesting look at it. What was the story about the smoking flute?
Smoking flute. Yes. Yeah, what it was what was great with Ace, and Don also talks about this, is he would like to surprise when he'd come on shows, he would like to do like a surprise thing. And he didn't tell him ahead of time that he had a prop. So because Ace was famous for his whole smoking a guitar effect live, he didn't tell anyone that he had a smoking flute. So he had it in his jacket. And I actually went back and watched this just maybe like 2 or 3 days ago. And he tells the three guys on the show, "All right, look, I don't want you to look at me, like, cover your eyes or like turn away." And then he he does it. I think he lights it and he's blowing it, and then all of a sudden, yeah, smoke starts coming out of it, and all
Yes.
the guys are laughing, and it's a lot funnier now. I remember when I saw it for the first time, I thought it was okay, but now that I see it, I really do think it's very, very funny, and I highly recommend people look up Ace Frehley, smoking flute. You can find it online.
Hey guys, back to the show just a bit, but first I want to tell you about an exclusive deal for Booked on Rock viewers. Get 15% off any purchase at oldglory.com. Over 300,000 officially licensed items covering music, sports, entertainment, and pop culture. Merchandise featuring legendary music artists like Bob Marley, The Beatles, Grateful Dead, Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin, and many more. Go to oldglory.com and make sure to use the promo code BookedOnRock. Also find a link in this episode's description, or just go to bookedonrock.com and click on My Deals. He had a cool story about the origins of the smoking guitar.
Yep, which he actually told me in this
He told you that, and it's
did.
really the specific guitar that he used that allowed him to do that, right? He put a little smoke bomb on the inside of the guitar.
Yeah, he talks about it would have been in 1974 during one of Kiss's early tours. He realized that if I put a smoke bomb in one of my guitars, if I put it in the back cavity behind the pickup and put the back plate back on and lit it, the only way the smoke is going to escape is through the actual pickup, the front. So he did that, and he said it worked great. It got a great response from the audience. The only problem is, he said it gummed up the inner workings of the wires and stuff like that. So he had to give it to a tech, and they redid the whole thing with like the wires, and yeah, they got a better setup going forward. And yeah, with later Kiss tours, you see that they have like a whole professional setup. A light would also shoot out of the pickup too, so when the smoke was coming out, it was kind of a cool effect, especially if you were in like an arena way back. You got to see like the smoke and the guitar and everything like that.
Really cool. He was a Les Paul guitar guy.
A Les Paul guitar, yes, exactly.
He also had a problem with what Paul told him while they were recording 1998 Psycho Circus. Right, not all four members are on that album, and I think they're only on one track, maybe two. It's Into the Void, I think.
Yep, the only one was the song that actually Ace wrote, which is the song called "Into the Void." Yeah, I don't understand what Paul and Gene's thinking was with that. That whole album I never liked. It doesn't sound like a real Kiss album. I didn't like that. I mean, I was hoping when that album came out, it was going to be a throwback to the 70s. In fact, to Paul and Gene's credit, the last two Kiss albums, Monster and Sonic Boom, to me, from what I remember, I haven't heard them in a long time, to be honest, but they had more of a rock 70s feel. That Psycho Circus album just sounded kind of like a Bon Jovi produced album, because it was, I believe, Bon Jovi's producer, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah,
I could look it up. Let me look it up here. While I look that up, I liked Sonic Boom. Monster's okay, but Sonic Boom I really liked. And you're right, they had that 70s sound to it.
Yeah, that's what I liked about it, that it was more of a Kiss sound, but the only thing that was missing was, of course, Ace and Peter. I would have liked to have heard that on the. And then,
what was the comment Paul made to him in the studio? Nobody cares about you and Peter, or
Ace, asked, like he said, like, why am I not playing or something like that? Like the fans want to hear the full Kiss, want to hear me, Peter, you, and Gene. Like, why is it not the full band? And Paul's comment was something like, "Oh, the fans don't care." And Ace was like, "Of course the fans care. What do you mean the fans don't care?"
What do you think? They bought tickets to the concerts.
But Kiss has been doing this since the beginning of time, back to the early. I think the Destroyer album had a few songs that Ace doesn't even play guitar on. So, and then of course it continued. We just talked about Anton Fig playing drums on Dynasty and also on Masked. Ace didn't play on a few of the songs on side 4 of Alive 2. That was Bob Kulick.
Yeah, and Alice Cooper's guitarist is on some tracks.
Yes, Hunter was one of the guys. Steve
Hunter, and
there was a second guitarist.
Another one, we can look it up. But Bruce Fairbairn is the one that produced Psycho Circus.
Okay.
But yeah, the other.
It is Dick Wagner.
There you go. Dick Wagner. You got to me before I got it on Google.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, there was a comment Paul and Gene made that inspired Ace's 78 solo album.
Yes, it is. Yeah, it's true. They had a meeting before they were all going to go off into their own and work on their own solo albums in 78. And Gene and Paul turned to Ace. They had a meeting, some kind of business meeting, and they were about to leave. And they turned to Ace and said, "Look, Ace, if you need any help, just, don't hesitate to, call us." And Ace was like, "Oh, all right. Well, I mean, that's kind of a dig." So he definitely inspired him. And to his credit, that I think is by far the best of the 4 solo albums that Ace Frehley's 78 solo album.
Listened to it all from start to finish the other day, and I agree. Love that album. The name Tommy Thayer came up. You asked Ace to clarify whether or not he owned the makeup design and all that stuff, which you alluded to. But what did he think about Thayer? I mean, what was his opinion of him?
Honestly, I made it a point not to bring up Tommy Thayer that much when I would interview him, but from interviews I saw with others, he seemed like he didn't really get along very well with him. There's a famous story that I think is in Paul's book that supposedly Ace once punched Tommy Thayer because before Tommy joined Kiss as Ace's spaceman type character, he was hired by Gene. Well, to back up, Tommy Thayer first crossed paths with Gene because Gene produced the band Black and Blue, which Tommy Thayer was a member of back in the 80s. He produced one or two albums of theirs. And then they became friendly, and Gene hired him as just a assistant back in, I guess, the late 80s, early 90s. He actually had a co-write on the Kiss album Hot in the Shade, which was 89. So he was already kind of working, he was already part of the Kiss world as far back as 89. And then he continued working for Gene. Then he must have then started working for Kiss because he was involved in the whole entire. I'm pretty sure he was behind the whole Kiss convention thing when Kiss. There were Kiss conventions in the late 80s, early 90s, but then Kiss did their own Kiss convention in 94, 95. And they did the Kiss My Ass tribute album and all that stuff. And I believe Tommy Thayer was definitely involved in that stuff. And then he was really involved in the whole entire reunion. And he was hired to reteach Ace his solos. Like him and Ace would sit down and they would go over his solos and they would probably compare him to CDs. And because also Tommy Thayer was even in a Kiss tribute band where he would play the role of Ace Frehley. So he knew all the solos and stuff. So he tried helping out Ace with that stuff. And then at some point, I don't know what happened, but there was a backstage thing
Ace
where,
was running late,
or
and
something. Yeah, something.
and
I
Thayer
forget what
was
it
there
was.
in costume.
Okay. Yeah, something. Yeah, something
I think
happened.
that's what it was. Ace
Yeah,
shows up. He's like, "What the fuck is this guy
right.
doing in my costume?" Because
Something
they didn't think
happened.
he
And
was going
yeah,
to
the
show.
story goes that Ace punches Tommy, but they must have been on decent terms because I know like a while back, Ace was on a Kiss cruise and he sat in with Kiss and it was with Tommy Thayer and they're all on the same stage together playing. So they must have
Again,
been.
yeah, Ace laid back, just let it go, whatever.
So I mean, I'm sure at some point they must have let bygones be bygones. It wasn't like he held a grudge or anything,
Well, yeah, and he seemed to be cool with all of the ex-Kiss guitarists, including Vinnie Vincent.
including Vinnie Vincent. Yes, exactly. He even said that his quote is that he and Vinnie got on famously, is what he even
Right?
said about them.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they
Now, if anybody he'd be pissed at, it'd be Vinnie Vincent because he took his spot in Kiss. But then again, by the time that happened, Ace was already done. He probably didn't care who was going to be taking his place.
yeah, about 3 or 4 years ago, there was a thing called Creatures Fest, which it had a jam thing where it was Vinnie Vincent on top of a tank to be a replica of the Kiss Creatures of the Night tour. So he's standing on top of a tank, and then to his left and right is Bruce Kulick and also Ace, which to me is a little insulting that Vinnie Vincent is on a higher thing than Ace. Meanwhile, we all know Ace is by far the most iconic, most important, most, legendary Kiss guitarist, and you're going to put him below on a pedestal, but that's
No,
just typical of Vinnie Vincent right there. But anyway,
was, you said it for me.
right. I asked Ace about it and he talked about it. He said he and Vinnie got along great, but then I also interviewed Bruce Kulick, not for this book, for a site called Ultimate Guitar, which I did use this interview in this book. I included it as like a little bonus. And I asked him, how was it playing with Ace and Vinny on stage? And Bruce did not hold back. I give Bruce a lot of credit.
Well, Bruce does not like Vinnie Vincent.
I forget his quote, but he was like, it was like an other world. The wackiest on stage experience he's ever had. And I said at the time, this is when Ace was still alive. I was like, would you ever play with Ace and Vinny again? I believe Ace he would, but no, Vinny was like, no, I will not play with Vinny again. No, that's
Oh
it.
yeah, he did not like Vinnie.
He did not like the whole experience, and he said that's it.
Was Ace open to going back to Kiss after he left in '02?
Yes, I actually asked him once. He at the time had just put out a studio album, a solo album, and I said, so now if Kiss come, this is right when Kiss announced they were doing the farewell tour, and I said, so if Kiss comes to you, even though you have a new album out, do you like what do you do? And he says, a Kiss reunion would take precedence over any solo thing that I'm doing. He made it very clear. The thing that actually Eddie Trunk made a good point once. Gene and Paul made it seem in the press like, oh, of course, all the past members are invited. They could just show up whenever they want. But Eddie Trunk is like, yeah, like you really like, okay, so Ace Frehley is going to show up at the back door of some arena. He's going to do this for free. There's not going to be any compensation. There's not going to be any there would have been contracts. There would have been, payment. Obviously, it's not like as simple as someone just showing up and coming. And then the whole thing with, all right, so now you're all in makeup. Like, is Ace coming up in makeup, not makeup? Is he playing the whole show? Is he just coming up at the end? Like, what's the story? Gene and Paul, I think, used it to their advantage, just kind of baiting fans like, oh, are they going to show up? Are they not? Especially with those last shows at Madison Square Garden. There was a whole thing in the air like, oh, are Ace and Peter going to show up? Maybe just for like one song. I mean, even there was talk is even like, Bruce going to show up? Because that probably would have made more sense, Bruce just showing up, because he could have just showed up in no makeup and just played some songs. But
Yeah, that would have been the perfect way to end it. And now, as we know, the questions as to whether Peter could get out there and do it. Well, Peter just is about to release a full album, so he could still play one show, I would think.
yeah,
And
one thing that I definitely had that I took exception to Gene and Paul is they always made it seem like Peter and Ace couldn't play past a certain point, and that's why they got rid of them. Even in the 90s, I remember before the reunion, like Gene and Paul were very vocal about, oh, Ace, he was once a great guitarist, but he just blew his
bullshit,
chance and he's not the same.
bullshit.
Yeah, it's total bullshit because you go back on YouTube. For the past week, I've been watching performances of Ace from 94 and 95, and he's playing better than ever. And he's also playing rare Kiss songs. Now, that was also another thing, which is total bullshit. Gene and Paul were often asked during the reunion tours with Ace and Peter, why are you not bringing back, or why are you not playing songs that were never played, and like, giving fans surprises and stuff like that? And their whole thing was, oh, Ace and Peter couldn't, play that stuff. They couldn't do it.
I know Peter struggled towards the end as he was the oldest of all the guys in the band. That granted, okay, but
Which is totally understandable because he was also the oldest member of the band, and drumming is a very physical thing. So that's
you want to go there in terms of a full tour with Peter, okay. But Ace was. It's not even until maybe the last year or so when some YouTube videos would come up and it'd be Ace, messing something up on stage. But that's the era we're in, where everybody loves to catch every time a performer has a bad night. Performers do have bad nights. So I don't know if it was just that, or maybe Ace was slipping a little, whatever. But we're talking about right up through the end of the road tour. Could Ace play? Hell yeah.
absolutely,
Hell yes. And for
absolutely.
one show, of course.
Yeah, I mean, one show or like one encore. I
one
know,
song.
I
I mean, come on.
know.
Well, one of the songs I wish they would have played more of, and they never did, was Rocket Ride. It's one of my favorite Ace songs.
Yeah, Kiss never played it live, but Ace played it live as a solo artist.
Can you share the story? I love it because now every time I listen to this, I'm picturing Ace sweating profusely as he's recording. I'll let you
Right.
tell this story. This is when he lived in Irvington, New York.
Yes, what happened was they were coming up with material on the fourth side of Kiss Alive 2. It's all studio songs. It was four new songs in one cover. And Ace was given the opportunity to do a song. So he wrote a song called Rocket Ride that he co-wrote with with a gentleman named Sean Delaney, who tends to get overlooked. He was a huge part of Kiss in the 70s. He was employed by Bill Aucoin, which was Kiss's original manager. I believe he was Bill Aucoin's boyfriend too, because they were both gay. And he was supposedly he's the one that told the guys like, look, when you're on stage, do this thing where you rock back and forth, like you do like a thing with your guitars, lift up your guitars together. And they listened to him and they did it, and they said, yeah, it actually works great. And I think it was him that said, look, you have to have an image. You all have to have white. You have to have a white face as the primer on your face. Then you have a specific design around your eyes. I'm pretty sure that was him that came up with that. It was him that said you all have to dye your hair black. It has to be a unified image because Ace had naturally brown hair, I believe. So and then on top of it, he also co-wrote a lot of their songs and even co-produced some of their albums and things like that. So he was crucial. And then what happens is he breaks up with Bill Aucoin in 79, 1980, and then you just never hear from him again, which is very weird. You would have thought that maybe Kiss would have employed him or someone, or Ace as a solo artist, someone would have written with him or hired him to help in some capacity, but you just never heard from him like ever again, which is kind of weird. But anyway,
And he died young, didn't he?
he did.
Yeah.
He did. Yeah, he died young, and he wrote a book that not too many people know about. I think it's called Hellbox. I know I have it. I don't think I ever really read it, but I should give that I should sit down and read that. It's probably an interesting book. But yeah, so he also co-wrote songs with Kiss, and he and Ace sat down and wrote the song called Rocket Ride. And for some reason, it was written up in Ace's attic, and the AC was broken. So Ace was saying they were sweating profusely, but they came up with this great song, so they just stuck it out. And yeah, it is a great song,
Ah,
and I
what a
believe,
phenomenal tune. And the solo.
yeah, if you listen to that song, I believe he two-hand taps, and that's in late '77.
Oh man, I love that song. You asked Ace what his most underrated song is. He couldn't really think of one. He said, "I'll leave that up to you." But he did name his top 5 guitar solos in Kiss: Deuce, Shock Me, Strange Ways, God of Thunder, and the live Rock and Roll All Night, which is a huge difference. And I know the studio version is the most famous version, I guess, or maybe not. Maybe the live version. No, because the live version, I think, maybe was a bigger
The
hit.
live version was the hit. The studio version came out first.
Okay. The difference maker is Ace's solo in the live version.
Ace's solo, and just that there's really no comparison. In fact, I was thinking the other day, the first time I ever heard Rock and Roll All Night, I got the double platinum album on cassette for I remember it was Christmas 1979.
That's cool.
And I thought it was a good song, but then I kept hearing or reading that it wasn't the studio album that was the hit; it was the live version. And I did not get the live album till a few albums in because it was a more expensive album at the time because it was a 2 record set.
That's the silver, the silver cover.
Double platinum was the silver cover. Yes.
Right. And they have like a remix, like a disco version
all
of
the songs are remixed, and they re-recorded Strutter.
That's the one.
Strutter 78. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, so what happened was then I finally heard the live version of Rock and Roll All Night, and I remember being, oh, now it makes sense. The live version is superior to the studio version, and also like you said, the studio version has no guitar solo. The live version does have a guitar solo.
I would put Parasite and Rip It Out solos on those songs are up there too, way up there. And there is one that you mentioned to him that I love, Dark Light from Music from the Elder.
Yes.
Do you have a favorite Ace solo?
Yes, I do. Strange Ways has to be at the top. That's definitely at the top. One that people tend to overlook is maybe because the song isn't the best known Kiss song. On the Love Gun album, it's a Gene Simmons song called Almost Human.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a solo. That album was produced by Eddie Kramer, who worked with Jimi Hendrix, Led Zeppelin, and he also produced Ace's 1978 solo album that we just talked about. And yeah, that solo, Ace's solo in that song, Almost Human, it has like a backwards thing that's a little bit like Jimi Hendrix. So that's kind of I would say, a definite underrated Ace solo. But yeah, Dark Light, Music from the Elder is kind of a goof album to me. I mean, I can appreciate it as a goof, but I will never, till the day I die, say it's a legitimate great Kiss album. I know there's a whole cult around that album where people say it's a great album. I put it in the same category as your Van Halen 3s, your Hot Spaces, your Metallica Lou Reed Lulus, like stuff that just, if I never heard it again, it should just be deleted.
There are some great moments on there, but overall, can't argue that. Did you see Jeff Tate from Queensryche said that's his favorite album?
Wow, I never read that. Wow,
now, I guess it makes sense because Queensryche is the theatrical band. So this had a theatrical type, overall, it's a concept album. Maybe that's why. But I thought that was pretty interesting to hear.
Well, one thing I did as a goof is not as a goof, but I'll explain what was the goof. For this book, one of the people I interviewed was Coheed and Cambria guitarist Travis Stever, and they're well-known, Coheed and Cambria. They're like a metal proggy type band, and I asked them, I'm like, oh well, since Coheed and Cambria has a lot of concept albums, was Music from the Elder ever a influence on any of Coheed and Cambria's concept albums? He's like, no, not at all.
No explanation needed. No. Okay, thought I'd ask. Let's go to Eddie Trunk, because Eddie was a longtime friend of Ace's.
I was speaking to him, which is just like less than a week ago from when this interview is being taped. he even at one point excused himself and said, "I'm sorry, I'm getting choked up
Oh
because
man.
it's still kind of raw talking about this." But
Yeah, he
yeah,
got Ace signed to his first solo
he
record
did.
deal with Megaforce, which nobody would sign Ace at that point because he was a liability. And Eddie Trunk was like, no man, we got to give this guy a chance. And Megaforce didn't have any really major names on the label, and he said, this is a guy that's going to get us on the radio.
Yep. Yeah. What happened was I reached out to Eddie, and I was on the fence. I was like, I mean, is it too like what we just said? I know it was great the on-air tribute he did to Ace, but you could tell he was getting choked up, and like you tell his voice because him and Ace have been friends since '86 is when they first met.
Ended every conversation with, I love you, brother. Ace would say to him, I love you, brother.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was really like losing a great friend for Eddie. So yeah, I was on like when I was doing these interviews for the book, I'm like, I really have to ask Eddie, even though I don't expect him to say yes, but when I reached out to him, I've interviewed Eddie many times over the years. He's a great guy. I told him what I was doing. He's always been a big supporter of my books. He's had me on his shows. I reached out to him for this book and I told him what I was doing, and automatically it wasn't like, well, let me think about it. He's like, yeah, definitely I'll do it. Just the only thing is I'm going on this rock cruise that I'm like emceeing, so just the scheduling we have to work out. So to his credit, again, he could have easily just been like, no, it's like too, touchy of a subject. It's, I'm still kind of uneasy discussing everything, but he was like, no, we should set it up. And what I did with Eddie is he's talked a lot about over the years his favorite Kiss albums and songs. In fact, for books that I even spoke to him for. But for this book, I wanted to ask him specifically about the Frehley's Comet era because he was a major part of that. Not too many people remember or know that Eddie was employed by Megaforce Records back then, and it was he who got Ace signed to Megaforce. Because yeah, like you were saying, Megaforce was known primarily as a metal label at that point, primarily for signing Metallica to their first deal, then also signing Anthrax, Testament, and also several other pretty big thrash metal type bands was really their forte. Yeah, and then Eddie went to Johnny Z, who was the head of that label, and said, "Look, we really got to talk to Ace. He hasn't put out any solo albums since he left Kiss. We have to try to get him on the label." But like what Eddie says, there was such a bad vibe around Ace because in 1982 he had this huge thing where he was drinking and driving, and he was on a high speed chase in his DeLorean with like the cops chasing him and stuff like that. And he's like, lucky he didn't get killed pretty
Well,
much.
the story I heard too, he's driving on the wrong side of the highway too. Was
That's
that
what I've heard. I've heard other, yeah. I mean, I've heard conflicting things. It's something I never asked Ace about because I didn't know if he wanted to talk about that. But I know he's definitely talked about it in the press, and he also talks about it in the song called "Rock Soldiers" off the first Frehley's Comet album, the self-titled. It's called Ace Frehley, Frehley's Comet from 1987. There's a song "Rock Soldiers." He actually talks about it in that song.
great song? Well, I'll finish with how you will remember Ace, but let's set that up with what Eddie said. So, I got his quote from your book. He says, honestly, Ace should really be remembered, and I don't think this is overstated, as one of the most consequential and influential people that ever picked up a guitar, and it inspired maybe more people than anyone to play guitar. And whether that was because of his playing or the visual or both, I think you'd be hard pressed to find many people that were as influential and inspirational to guitar players as Ace was. And he had started by saying he's one of the funniest guys and the nicest guys, but that was something that he felt was really important to mention. How should Ace be remembered in your opinion?
Well, after like I just mentioned that quote that the gentleman Paris Mayhew talks about the comparison between the Shock Me Alive 2 solo compared to Van Halen Eruption. Um, there's been really just two times that I can think of where a guitarist came along and it was like totally up to it, rock music was, or rock guitar was on a certain path. A guitarist comes along, then suddenly it's like rock guitar sounds totally different. It totally alters the course of rock guitar, totally alters rock music, just like in, you could say, general. And the two times it's really happened were with Jimi Hendrix in the 60s, and then, of course, Eddie Van Halen in 1978. With what Paris Mayhew had to say, it got me thinking. you could now make the argument that it was Ace Frehley that bridged the Jimi Hendrix era to the Eddie Van Halen era, meaning that if you listen to that unaccompanied solo on Kiss Alive 2, he's doing a lot of things that are similar sounding to Eruption. You hear like I said, the whole dive bomb thing. It's not really a dive bomb. He's doing what's called dinosaur bend, which is a similar sound, but he's doing two-handed tapping. He's doing like trills and very fast runs and stuff like that. So really, Ace also really next to those two other guitarists, Jimi Hendrix and Eddie Van Halen, maybe influenced as many people as those two as well. If you think about the wide variety and how many people have listed Ace as a influence over the years and inspired these guitarists to also pick up a guitar in the first place, it's really those three guitarists. I think Jimmy, Eddie, Ace, those three are probably the most have inspired the most amount of rock guitarists over the years, I would say.
He was larger than life, as was all four members of Kiss in that original era, with the costumes and the makeup and the mystery. What do they look like? And then seeing them on stage and the shows that they put on, he was larger than life. There's no question. And then when you get to interview him as you did, and you see the interviews with him on TV, you just realize he's just a down to earth New Yorker, and he had a great sense of humor, and he was pretty damn humble. I mean, he had a healthy ego. He knew he was good, but at the same time, he was, he didn't walk around like, everybody was beneath him. In fact, there are stories of, I think Eddie Trunk told the story about early on in those early Megaforce days, and Eddie was at a gig with Ace, and they went to the local bars and just hung out there, and fans came up to Ace, and he was having drinks with them and all that.
The makeup and the costumes were definitely a double-edged sword because it absolutely people did not take them as seriously as songwriters and also as musicians. I think Kiss are highly underrated songwriters. If I'm talking specifically about their 70s era, that's by far the only era that I really listen to and really enjoy the most. And yeah, Ace's guitar playing, he was, I think, probably the most talented musically of the Kiss group. But yeah, I think the whole makeup and also costumes, people tended to not be able to look beyond that, and they just thought they're just like some kind of like kiddie band or something like that. Whereas there's no denying by 1979, 1980, small children were the predominant makeup of their audience. Early on, Kiss was really just like a hard rock band that was playing to teenagers and people in their 20s and things like that. So yeah, I mean, but again, without the makeup and without the costumes, they wouldn't have probably become as big as they became. And there's a great quote in the book that Kiss was a lot of people's Beatles, meaning that was, it's what the Beatles did to people in the 60s, inspiring people to pick up instruments and form bands. That's what Kiss did, not only in the 70s, but well beyond the 70s. I mean, I spoke to Kim Thayil from the band Soundgarden. He was influenced by Ace. Alex Skolnick, who was in Testament, was influenced by Ace. I interviewed Jesse Hughes from the band Eagles of Death Metal. He was influenced by Ace. Travis Stever from Coheed and Cambria. A wide variety of all different styles of music, and all these guys list Ace as a important musical influence.
Talk to Me, Conversations with Ace Frehley is the book. Much more from Ace and those who knew him in the book, along with, by the way, a ton of great photos from Kiss in the 70s. Mm-hmm. Who's Richard? Is it Galbraith?
Yes, his name is Richard Galbraith.
I'm sorry, Richard Galbraith.
He put out a Kiss photo book about 10 or 15 years ago that I helped him with.
Okay.
He took great photos of Van Halen, too, back in 78.
Well, Richard, if you're listening to this, man, phenomenal photos here. There's tons of them that he took. Yes, but also you have 80s photos, 90s, right up to recent years of Ace too.
Yeah, what I've done over the years, I've made great relationships with some outstanding photographers that should really be better known. I mean, I know like there's guys like Ross Halfin are very well known, but there are lesser known photographers that took pictures just as good. And this gentleman by the name of Richard Galbraith took some. He was lucky enough to shoot so many of these great bands at their 70s peak, like Van Halen on their first ever tour, Kiss through the 70s, the Sex Pistols on their only U.S. tour with Sid, all these great artists. And I also become friendly with a gentleman named is Christopher Lee Helton. He took a lot of great photos back in the 80s. Another photographer named Stephen J. Messina, who took great photos in the 80s, 90s, all the way up to today. And then also, I even took some photos over the years that I was able to use of Ace more recent, like when I saw him play at a place called the Paramount in Huntington, New York. It's like a theater-sized venue. It's a very nice venue that Ace played several times, and I was able to get very close because I'm such an Ace fan.
Props to all these guys. Stephen Messina with those photos from the 90s, Christopher Lee Helton, you mentioned. All great photos here from group of guys here.
Yes, and Richard Galbraith is the guy who took phenomenal photos of Kiss back in the 70s.
Oh, man, he's got Ace in the Cape from 79, Ace in his solo with the smoke all around him. So those are in there as well. There's a great shot here, too, from Tulsa Assembly Center, Tulsa, Oklahoma, November 26, 1977, where Ace and Gene are both looking back at the fire coming up
Yes.
on the stage.
Yeah, I believe what the story behind those photos is that those photos are from Richard again, and he did not have a photo pass, so he just snuck a camera in, and I think he could only get from like the side of the stage, which actually made for two very unique, interesting photos because you never really get to see the side of the Love Gun stage, and yeah, and it's a cool. He was able to time a shot perfectly where it's Ace and Gene turning around, looking for a cue, I think from Peter Criss, and they're both looking at him, and it's pretty cool.
And you see the fire coming up. Another one here, Municipal Auditorium, Kansas City, Missouri, July 26, 1976. Richard takes a shot of Ace. He's holding, this is during his solo, holding the guitar up. The smoke's coming out of the guitar. It's a great shot of Ace.
You know what you got to do? You have to show the actual photo during this.
I will do, if it's okay with you. Yeah,
Yes.
it's cool with you and Richard.
As long as we credit Richard Galbraith, a phenomenal photographer.
I'm going to put those up on the video. So for those listening on audio, check this out on YouTube. Greg, thanks for putting this book together. Ace fans are going to love this. Now they can get it anywhere, right? Amazon, usual spots.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say Amazon is the best place. It's available as paperback, hardcover, Kindle, and very, very shortly audio. I just sent the audio files to the company. Usually takes about 1 or 2 weeks. So hopefully within a week or two after this interview runs, a audio version will be available as
well. Awesome. All right, Greg, thank you for coming on. Talk to you again soon.
Thank you, Eric, and long live Ace Frehley.